The phone felt unnaturally cold against my ear, a stark contrast to the simmering, almost detached calm I felt settling over me as my mother's voice cracked on the other end of the line. Judith Hayes, my 70-year-old mother, was crying, the messy, gulping sobs of someone genuinely panicked. She was weaving a frantic tale about my older brother, Robert, Rob, the perennial golden child, and his rapidly imploding financial situation. The electricity bill was past due, threatening imminent darkness. The repo man was circling like a vulture around the flashy, barely used truck he'd bought just months ago. Credit card collectors were calling incessantly. "Evelyn, honey, I just don't know what to do," she wailed, her voice thick with tears and desperation. "Robbie's trying his best, he really is, but things just snowballed. You, with your good job, your stability. Maybe you could just help him out this one time? A little loan? Just until he gets back on his feet?" My name is Evelyn Hayes. I'm 45 years old. I'm the head nurse of the cardiac care unit at St. Luke's Hospital here in Denver, a job I worked my ass off for years to achieve, a job that demands precision, responsibility, and the ability to remain calm under immense pressure. And right now, listening to my mother plead for me to rescue my brother from the consequences of his own recklessness, I felt that professional calm descend, chilling but necessary. Because just 6 months ago, almost to the day, this same mother, Judith, had sat across from me at her kitchen table, the table my father had lovingly refinished, her expression not tearful but coolly resolute. She had informed me then, with a dismissive wave of her hand, that nearly the entirety of my late father's estate, the paid-off family home where she and Rob now lived, he'd moved back in after his second divorce, the substantial savings account Dad had diligently built over 40 years, his modest but steady stock portfolio, would be transferred solely to Rob. My share? A few pieces of Mom's old costume jewelry deemed too sentimental for Rob and a faded photograph album. Her justification, delivered with unwavering conviction, still echoed in my ears. "Robbie just needs a better start this time around, Evie. Life's been harder on him." And the kicker, "Besides, you're a girl. You've got your career. You know how to take care of yourself." Yes, Mom, I do know how to take care of myself. I'd learned that lesson early and often in this family, and Rob's better start, funded by the inheritance that should have been, by all rights and perhaps even by Dad's quiet wishes, shared equally. It seemed that lavish head start was already sputtering towards a spectacular crash landing. And now, having stripped me of my birthright because I was capable, they were turning back to capable Evelyn, expecting me to clean up the mess their favoritism had created. I listened to my mother cry, listened to the litany of Rob's impending financial disasters. I pictured her twisting the phone cord, her brow furrowed with genuine worry. Worry not for the injustice done to me, but for the comfort of her precious son. And as she finally paused, waiting breathlessly for my inevitable offer of help, the offer that had always come before, I said, "Absolutely nothing." The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by her ragged breathing. The bank of Evelyn, the one that had always offered quiet support despite the unfairness, was permanently closed, and I was morbidly curious to see how this played out. Growing up as the younger sister to Robert Hayes was an early education in the subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, dynamics of parental favoritism. Rob was charming when he wanted to be, athletic, popular, the quintessential all-American boy who could seemingly do no wrong in our mother Judith's eyes. His grades were mediocre? He's just bored, too smart for these teachers. He got into minor trouble with his friends. Boys will be boys, just harmless fun. He dropped out of college after 2 semesters because it wasn't challenging enough. He needs to find his own path, discover his passion. I, on the other hand, was the quiet, studious one, the responsible one, the one who got good grades, followed the rules, helped around the house without being asked multiple times. These traits weren't particularly praised. They were simply expected. If I slipped up, brought home a B+ instead of an A, or forgot a chore, the disappointment was palpable. "We expect better from you, Evelyn. You need to set an example for your brother." The irony wasn't lost on me even then. My father, George Hayes, was a quieter presence, a kind man, a civil engineer who worked hard and provided well for us. He loved us both, I believe, but he wasn't one for grand, emotional displays. He often seemed baffled by Rob's antics and Judith's constant enabling, occasionally trying to instill some discipline or financial sense into Rob, usually with little success before Judith intervened. Dad and I shared a quieter bond, built on shared reading interests, hikes in the nearby Rockies, and my fascination with his precise blueprints and drawings. He encouraged my interest in science and medicine, telling me I had a good head on my shoulders and could do anything I set my mind to. I clung to his quiet approval like a lifeline. As we grew older, the pattern solidified. I went to nursing school, worked demanding shifts, paid off my own student loans, bought my own modest condo across town. Rob drifted between jobs, car salesman, bartender, a disastrous attempt at day trading, funded by Judith naturally, eventually landing a vaguely defined consulting gig that seemed to involve a lot of golf. He married young, had a kid, got divorced messily, married again, that ended too. Through it all, Judith was his safety net, always ready with a loan, a sympathetic ear, and a place to land, often back in his old bedroom in the family home, when things inevitably fell apart. I, meanwhile, was expected to be the stable one, the one who had her life together, the one who could be relied upon and occasionally tapped for help. I helped Mom with Dad's care during his final illness, juggling my demanding hospital shifts while Rob made infrequent, brief appearances, usually looking uncomfortable and eager to leave. Dad's passing 2 years ago, after a prolonged battle with emphysema, was devastating. He'd been the anchor, the quiet force of reason in our lopsided family dynamic. He hadn't left a formal, updated will. Something Judith later claimed was because he trusted her completely to do what was right. The house was in both their names, and the savings and stocks were mostly joint accounts that passed directly to her. I held on to a naive hope, however, that maybe, just maybe, with Dad gone, Mom would finally see the need for fairness, that she would honor what I believed were his unspoken intentions, to provide for both his children equally. That hope was brutally extinguished 6 months ago. Mom called me and Rob over for Sunday dinner. The atmosphere felt strange, heavy. After picking at her pot roast, Judith cleared her throat and made her pronouncement. She spoke calmly, almost matter-of-factly, outlining her decision regarding Dad's estate. The family home in the pleasant Denver suburb where they lived, easily worth a significant amount in the current market, would be fully transferred to Rob's name. He could live there with her indefinitely, or sell it if he chose, though she clearly hoped he wouldn't. The entirety of Dad's savings and investment portfolio, a sum I knew had to be substantial after decades of his careful management, would also go to Rob, to give him a fresh start, a solid foundation. My inheritance? As mentioned, the box of costume jewelry, gaudy brooches, and clip-on earrings I hadn't even known she still owned, and the dusty photo albums. "Things with sentimental value, dear," she'd said, patting my hand with a sorrowful expression that didn't reach her eyes. I was too stunned to react immediately. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Rob, across the table, had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable for a fleeting moment, shifting in his seat, before adopting an expression of solemn gratitude towards Mom. He didn't look at me. Not once. When I finally found my voice, it trembled. "Mom." "What? Why?" "Dad always said, he always implied he wanted things split fairly." Judith waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, your father said many things, dear, but he trusted my judgment. And my judgment is that Rob needs this more. Life hasn't been as kind to him. He needs stability, a chance to finally build something for himself." "You," she added, delivering the familiar refrain, are strong. You have your career, your independence. You don't need this inheritance the way he does. Honestly, Evelyn, think of it as looking out for your brother. Isn't that what family does? Family. The word felt like ash in my mouth. I tried to argue, pointing out Rob's history of financial irresponsibility, questioning the fairness, the sheer imbalance of it all. But Judith remained unmovable, her expression hardening from faux sympathy to stony resolve. Rob stayed silent, letting Mom fight his battles, just as he always had. I left their house that day feeling profoundly betrayed, not just cheated out of money, but erased, dismissed, deemed less worthy simply because I hadn't failed as spectacularly as my brother. The injustice of it settled deep in my bones, a cold, heavy weight. Predictably, Rob embraced his fresh start with gusto. Within weeks of the accounts being transferred to his name, the signs of his windfall were impossible to ignore. First came the truck, not a practical pickup, but a massive, fully loaded, gas-guzzling status symbol, cherry red with all the bells and whistles. Then came the necessary home improvements, not essential repairs, but cosmetic upgrades. Tearing out the perfectly functional kitchen Dad had updated just 5 years prior to install trendy granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, landscaping the backyard into something resembling a miniature resort patio, with a built-in barbecue island, installing a home theater system in the basement. Judith, far from counseling restraint, seemed to bask in Rob's reflected glory. She'd call me. Our conversations became strained and infrequent after the inheritance meeting, but she still called occasionally, mostly to talk about Rob, to boast about the beautiful new kitchen, the smart investment Rob was making in the house, how talented he was with design choices. She forwarded pictures of Rob on a lavish solo find myself trip to Costa Rica shortly after the renovations began. There was talk of him starting a new consulting business from home, though the details remained conveniently vague. During this period, Rob treated me with a newfound air of dismissive condescension on the rare occasions our paths crossed, usually obligatory holiday gatherings I attended solely out of a lingering, misplaced sense of duty. He'd make casual remarks about his portfolio performance, likely non-existent or rapidly dwindling, or his upcoming projects, clearly enjoying his status as the man of the house, the one with the resources. He never once acknowledged the source of his sudden wealth or the injustice done to me. It was simply his due. Judith, meanwhile, would occasionally offer me unsolicited advice, suggesting I should be happy for your brother's success and try not to be resentful, dear. It's not becoming. I held my tongue, maintained a polite distance, and simply watched. As a nurse, I'm trained to observe, to note subtle changes, to anticipate potential crises based on symptoms. And the symptoms of Rob's impending financial disaster were becoming increasingly obvious to anyone paying attention. Anyone except, it seemed, our mother. I heard through the family grapevine, a cousin who still spoke to both sides, that Rob had sunk a significant chunk of the inheritance into a friend's, highly speculative tech startup. I saw him driving the flashy truck less often, opting for Mom's older sedan. Judith's boasts about his investments faded, replaced by vague complaints about the rising cost of everything, how property taxes were bleeding them dry, how Rob was working so hard but facing unexpected setbacks with his consulting venture. Then came the probing calls from Judith, testing the waters. Evelyn, honey, how are things at the hospital? Are you getting enough hours? Everything okay with your finances? Questions she'd never shown much interest in before. She'd sigh dramatically about her own fixed income, about how much upkeep the house required now, about a sudden and likely imaginary dental bill she was worried about. The subtext was clear. She was laying the groundwork, reminding me of my status as the capable one, the one with the steady paycheck. Listening to these calls, hearing the subtle shift from pride to anxiety in my mother's voice, a strange numbness settled over me. The sharp agony of the inheritance betrayal hadn't disappeared, but it had morphed into something colder, more observational. It wasn't schadenfreude, not exactly. I didn't actively wish for Rob's downfall, but there was a grim sense of inevitability, a cold confirmation of everything I knew about my brother's lack of discipline and my mother's willful blindness. They had made their choices. Judith choosing favoritism over fairness, Rob choosing instant gratification over responsibility. They had sown the wind with Dad's hard-earned money, and the whirlwind was now gathering force on the horizon. I had cried myself sick after Dad died. I had shed bitter tears of betrayal after the inheritance meeting. There would be no more tears from me for this self-inflicted drama. I wouldn't intervene. I wouldn't enable. I wouldn't rush in to save them from the consequences they had so carelessly invited. I would simply stand back, detached, and watch the inevitable unfold. My silence, my inaction, would be my final statement on the matter. The descent, when it came, was faster and messier than even I had anticipated. Rob's consulting business evaporated, likely having never generated a single dollar. The Friends tech startup presumably folded, taking Rob's investment with it. The remaining inheritance money, clearly not managed with any foresight, simply ran out, consumed by the expensive truck payments, the high cost of living large, and likely undisclosed debts Rob had brought into his windfall. Judith's calls to me escalated from subtle hints to overt pleas. First, it was small, seemingly insignificant requests. "Evie, honey, could you possibly lend Mom just a couple $100 for my prescription co-pays this month? Things are just a little tighter than usual." I politely declined, citing my own budget. "Sorry, Mom, things are tight here too." Then it was slightly larger amounts framed with more urgency. "Evelyn, Rob's car insurance is due and he's a bit short. Could you just cover it this once? He needs the truck for job interviews." Again, I refused, gently but firmly. "Mom, Rob needs to figure out his own expenses. I can't take that on." Her frustration grew with each refusal. "Evelyn, I don't understand you. He's your brother. Don't you care?" "I care, Mom," I replied evenly. "But you told me he needed a fresh start with Dad's money. This is his start. He needs to learn to manage it." Then came the panicked call I recounted earlier. The electricity bill. The looming truck repossession. My continued silence on that call clearly sent a message, because the next communication wasn't from Judith. It was a text message from Rob himself, the first direct contact in months. "Evie, look, I know things are weird between us. Mom told me you guys talked. Listen, I messed up, okay? Big time. I got carried away with the money. But I'm in a real jam now, serious. Can you help me out? Just this once? Alone, I'll pay you back, swear to God. Don't let me lose the truck. Please." As my sister, his attempt at humility, the appeal to sibling loyalty after months of dismissive behavior and benefiting from my disinheritance, felt particularly galling. I typed back a brief, unambiguous reply. "Rob, I cannot help you financially. I suggest you explore options like selling assets you can no longer afford or finding immediate employment. I wish you luck." I blocked his number immediately after sending it. Predictably, Rob's failure likely sent Judith into overdrive. Her next few calls, which I let go to voicemail, were tearful, rambling messages invoking Dad's memory. "Your father would want you to help your brother," accusing me of being cold and unforgiving, and then escalating to emotional blackmail. "Evelyn, the stress of all this. My blood pressure is through the roof. The doctor says I need to avoid aggravation. If something happens to Rob, if they take his truck, I don't know what I'll do. I might have a heart attack myself. Is that what you want?" She even enlisted Aunt Carol again, who called me at the hospital. How she got the direct line, I don't know, leaving a message urging me to show some Christian charity and remember that family is family no matter what. I deleted the voicemails without responding. My resolve held firm. This was not my crisis to solve. The inevitable climax arrived late one Thursday afternoon, about a week after the initial panicked call about the bills. I was just leaving the hospital after a long, draining shift, walking towards my car in the parking garage, when I saw them waiting near my parking spot. Judith and Rob. They both looked terrible. Judith's face was pale and drawn, her eyes red-rimmed. Rob looked gaunt, unshaven, stripped bare of his usual bravado, replaced by a raw, desperate anxiety. He couldn't even meet my eyes initially. Judith rushed towards me as soon as she saw me, grabbing my arm. "Evelyn, thank God. We need to talk to you. Please, honey, just listen." Rob shuffled forward awkwardly behind her. "Evie, please," he mumbled, staring at the concrete floor. I don't know where else to turn." I stopped, pulling my arm gently but firmly away from Judith's grasp. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't resort to accusations. I simply looked at them, my gaze steady, perhaps colder than I intended, but utterly resolute. "There's nothing to talk about, Mom. I've made my position clear." "But you don't understand," Judith cried, tears starting anew. "They're going to take the truck tomorrow. The electricity is scheduled for shutoff on Monday. Rob found a notice about possibly losing the house if the property taxes aren't paid soon. We'll be homeless. Your own mother and brother." "Losing the house?" I repeated quietly, the irony thick enough to taste. "The house that was supposed to be Rob's solid foundation. The house bought and paid for by Dad's hard work, the house I wasn't deemed worthy of inheriting." Rob finally looked up, his eyes filled with a desperate plea. "Evie, I know I screwed up. I was an idiot. But please don't let Mom lose the house because of me. Help us keep the lights on. Just give me time to figure things out. I'll get a job, any job. I'll pay you back every cent, I swear." I looked from his desperate face to my mother's tear-streaked one, and I felt nothing. The well of sympathy, of familial obligation, had finally run completely dry, evaporated by years of unfairness and this final, blatant act of disinheritance. "I can't help you, Rob," I stated, my voice even, "and I won't help you, Mom." "But why?" Judith sobbed, clutching her chest dramatically. "Are you really that cold? That hateful towards your own family?" "No, Mom," I said, the words coming out clearer and stronger than I expected. "I'm not hateful. I'm just finally accepting the terms you set 6 months ago. You told me Rob needed the fresh start more than I did. You said I was capable, that I could take care of myself. You made your choice about how Dad's legacy would be used. Well, Rob got his fresh start. He made his choices with it. And I am taking care of myself, just like you were so confident I could." I paused, letting the words hang in the cold garage air. "You didn't want my input on the inheritance. You didn't value my contributions or my feelings then. You can't expect my financial rescue now just because Rob squandered the fortune you handed him, the fortune that should have been shared. These are the consequences of your choices, Mom, and his." I looked directly at Rob. "You're a grown man, Rob. It's long past time you stood on your own 2 feet without using Mom as a shield or me as a bank. Sell the truck you can't afford. Get a real job, pay your own bills. That's how you figure things out." Their faces registered shock, then disbelief, then a dawning, sickening realization that the final door had just been slammed shut, bolted and barred. The bank of Evelyn was not just closed, it had been demolished. Rob seemed to deflate, all the fight going out of him, leaving only a hollow shell of despair. Judith stared at me, speechless for once, her mouth opening and closing silently, perhaps finally understanding the irreparable damage her favoritism had wrought. "I have to go," I said quietly. "I have another shift early tomorrow." I walked around them, got into my sensible, paid-for sedan, and drove away, leaving them standing alone under the harsh fluorescent lights of the parking garage, finally facing the cold, hard reality they had created for themselves. There was no satisfaction in that moment, only a profound, weary sadness and the quiet certainty that I had finally done the right, albeit incredibly difficult, thing for myself. The aftermath unfolded much as I'd expected, observed from a self-imposed, necessary distance. I didn't seek out information, but snippets inevitably reached me through concerned, or perhaps just gossipy, relatives who still maintained contact with both sides. The cherry red truck was indeed repossessed within days of our parking garage encounter. Rob, stripped of his status symbol, was apparently devastated. The electricity was shut off for almost a week before Judith managed to scrape together funds, likely by selling some of the very jewelry she deemed my only inheritance, to get it turned back on. Facing the very real threat of losing the house due to unpaid property taxes, Rob was finally forced into action. He didn't land a high-flying consulting gig. According to my cousin Linda, he took a job, a physically demanding minimum-wage position at a local warehouse distribution center. Humiliating for him, no doubt, after his brief stint as the man of leisure, but necessary. He also reportedly sold off the expensive home theater system and some of the newer furniture to cover immediate debts. Judith's life also changed dramatically. Without my silent subsidies, and with Rob earning barely enough to cover his own basic needs, let alone contribute significantly to household expenses or her comfort, the financial pressure became immense. The house, once her castle, apparently started to feel like a burden, its upkeep costs suddenly glaringly obvious. Linda mentioned Judith seemed constantly stressed, had lost weight and rarely left the house, her previous social activities curtailed by lack of funds. The mother-son dynamic, once characterized by enabling adoration, reportedly became strained, laced with unspoken resentment and occasional arguments overheard by neighbors. Judith was living, quite literally, with the consequences of her choices, trapped in the solid foundation she had prioritized for her son, which now felt more like quicksand.